It's been a little over 4 months since Naruto and Jiraiya left Konoha on a training trip, and they were in the lands west of Kaze no Kuni. They kept a low profile, staying away from major cities, visiting only outposts to get supplies. When Naruto was sitting on a log, watching the sun begin to rise, he heard Jiraiya returning to the camp, and, turning around, saw Sanina with a towel around her neck and bare breasts. Naruto couldn't help but sigh when he saw the massive scar on the older man's chest left after Jiraiya used the key to loosen the seal holding the kyubi. "We're only a few hours from the city, Naruto. When we get there, I'll bring you the scrolls I told you about and leave the next day," said the hermit toad, finishing dressing. "Are you sure I should stay?" Jiraiya sighed at having to discuss it with the blonde again. Naruto sighed. He didn't like it at all when he stood up and brushed the dirt off his pants. "I know, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. How long will you be away?" "To be honest, I don't know. It may take from a few weeks to a couple of months, depending on what I find out. I also left instructions for the toads in case something happens, but you have to transform into a different shape for your safety." Naruto used the transformation technique by slightly changing his appearance. Now he had dark brown hair, green eyes, light brown skin, and the traces of a mustache disappeared. While Naruto was packing his backpack, Jiraiya walked around the camp, making sure all their tracks were gone before giving him the signal to leave. 2 weeks later, Naruto was working at a hotel in the small village of Ritoramido, working at the hotel as a handyman and bouncer. There were only about 150 people living in the village. It was a few days from the nearest village and more than a week from everything that was even remotely considered a city. Naruto found him quite peaceful and almost sleepy compared to Konoha. Most of the time his clone stayed at the hotel while he went to the forest to train, but always returned to the hotel for the evening rush. Wiping one of the tables that day, Naruto was glad for this break. The villagers were friendly, and there was none of the hatred he faced in his hometown. The owner of the hotel was an old man whose family died many years ago from a smallpox outbreak, with the exception of his 27-year-old granddaughter. She didn't know that he was one of Jiraiya's many spies and treated Naruto well, despite the fact that she didn't know anything except that Naruto worked for Sannin. A smile blossomed on his lips as he thought of some of the people he had met in the village. He often talked to some mothers who visited the hotel with their children. He was more than surprised by their hospitality, especially considering how recently they had started asking him to look after their children. "Jisei Aniki. This lady is looking for Naruto." Naruto ruffled the boy's hair before looking at the woman. She appeared to be about 20 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, long red hair to her knees, purple eyes, slim but figure skater build and fair skin. She was wearing a dark green tunic that reached mid-thigh and brown trousers. Naruto briefly appreciated the beauty of the woman before greeting her. "I am Jisei. May I know your name?" Naruto said, bowing to the woman. The redhead responded with a bow before introducing herself. "My name is Hijiki. Is Naruto-san at home? I'd like to talk to him." A few minutes later, Naruto returned with an elderly man who was smiling broadly. "Hijiki, it's good to see you again. How are you?" The woman stood up to greet the old man. "Everything is fine. I am a little worried about the letter I received from our mutual friend. Is there somewhere we can talk?" Naruto squinted in Naruto's direction, wondering if he knew anything about this before waving Hijiki to follow him. "Of course. We can talk in my office. Jisei, ask Mariko to bring us some tea." Naruto nodded to him before executing the order. Following Naruto, she watched the Jisei, wondering what made the old man look at him like that when she mentioned their mutual friend. She decided to find out everything she could from Naruto after the conversation. When they reached his office, they chatted until his granddaughter came with tea. Thank you, Mariko. Hijiki and I will probably be staying here for a while, so could you tell Jisei that he will have to work at the bar for now? Of course, Ajikan. Do you want me to bring some food later? Sounds like a good idea. Then you should bring some more fresh tea. Mariko nodded to him, poured Naruto and Hijiki tea, and closed the door behind her when she left. Hijiki sipped her tea before looking at the old man. Did Jiraiya say anything to you about what he's doing? Naruto shook his head as he set the cup down on the table. No. When I saw him 2 weeks ago, he only told me that he was leaving for a while and that Jisei should stay here until he returned. Hijiki frowned. What does he have to do with this? The letter I received didn't say anything about him, but only said that I had to lie down on the ground because things were getting serious. Naruto ran a worried hand through his hair, trying to figure out what Jiraiya was up to. To be honest, I do not know, but some rumors that I have heard lately make me glad that I do not live in the East. From what I've heard, Konoha was captured by Suna and some new village led by Orochimaru. Seeing Hijiki's expression, she raised her hand reassuringly. Konoha repelled the invading forces, forcing Sunu to surrender, and inflicted heavy losses on enemy ninjas. Konoha paid a high price, despite the light losses they suffered. There are rumors that Genin Konoha fought with some kind of demon, which Suna somehow managed to win over to her side. Other nations seem to be waiting to see how things will develop before making a move, especially Kiri. The civil war has finally ended there. When I asked Jiraiya about this, he confirmed some of the rumors, but kept silent about the details. Maybe when he comes back, you can get more information from him. Taking a calming breath, she put down her cup and looked at Naruto again. You can bet I'll find out what's going on from Jiraiya the next time I see him. In the meantime, why don't you tell me about this Jisei? Since the town was a farming settlement, the inn had a lot to do at sunset, which made Naruto busy keeping the peace, even if most of the hooliganism was caused by friendly arguments. When the crowd relaxed a bit, he spent most of his time at the bar chatting with the locals and helping Mariko and the cook. It was at this time that Hijiki entered the common area after talking with Naruto. She was leaning against the wall, watching the scene, wondering why Jiraiya had brought Jisei here and what the pervert was up to. Naruto had little to say about the teenager other than the fact that he was hardworking, very friendly, and helpful. Naruto suspected that he was a shinobi, but Jisei had not yet shown anything convincing. When she observed his behavior, it only confirmed what she was told, but she noticed something that Naruto probably didn't notice. She saw how Jisei was moving and realized that he was a trained shinobi. The only question was how long. While she was thinking about these things, she noticed that someone came up to the bar and spoke softly to Jisei. Her curiosity grew even more when the teenager grinned and looked at Naruto's granddaughter. After a few more words, both men rolled up their sleeves and began an arm wrestling match. As much as she trusted Jiraiya, she also knew how suspicious, deceitful, and manipulative he could be, and hoped to learn more about Jisei and why he was here. When she sat down at the bar, her eyes widened slightly when she saw the seal on Jisei's shoulder, which caused alarm in her head. It was a seal she remembered all too well, since her late husband and Jiraiya had designed it together. Feeling a little betrayed by Sannin, she stared at the seal, unconsciously vibrating her chakra, which caused Jisei to look at her out of the corner of his eye. Catching the eye, like any experienced kunoichi, she decided to talk to the shinobi undercover to find out why he has such a seal. Narrowing her eyes, she watched them continue their match, knowing that if he wanted, Jisei would have won instantly, but deliberately lost before heading to the kitchen. When he came back, he had a plate of lunch. Her eyes followed the man who placed the plate on the table and invited Mariko to join him. From what she could tell, the man was either a good friend or was trying to woo the woman. Her attention returned to Jisei as he leaned on the counter half a meter away from her. "What did you see interesting?" he asked with a slight smile. "You could say that. Do you want to tell me how you fit into Jiraiya's plans?" she said, looking at him with a raised eyebrow. Jisei squinted at her with a slight laugh before answering. "I'm just helping out here with the little things. Mostly with the content and make sure that no one makes too much noise. Other than that, Naruto-san doesn't ask for much." Hijiki gritted her teeth, not being in the mood for games, and squeezed his hand tightly just above the elbow. "We both know what I meant, and while we're talking, tell me where you got that seal on your hand." Jisei's smile faded as he looked at where she was holding his hand before quickly regaining his composure. Taking a quick glance around, he was glad that no one was watching them. Trying not to attract attention, he slid his right hand to her wrist and grabbed it so that he hit the nerve cluster, freeing his hand. "This is not the place to talk about such things. Either wait until I finish the job, or leave," he said in a dangerous tone. Despite the fact that there was still a friendly smile on his face, Hijiki looked into his eyes for a moment before chuckling. "Okay, but you'll tell me tonight," she said in a tone that was almost obviously laced with venom. Jisei nodded to her before standing up again. "Then wait, I have clients to take care of," he said before leaving to talk to some visitors. By the time the last visitor left, it was about 11 p.m., and Jisei's work for today was done. Hijiki spent her time relaxing and watching Jisei communicate with everyone. His friendliness seemed too natural to be fake, but it only increased her curiosity about the purpose of Jiraiya inviting him here. When Jisei finally approached her, she stood up and motioned for him to go ahead. Receiving a nod in response, the guy followed her into her room. She was silent until they arrived. Jisei sipped his tea, waiting for her to start a conversation, and looked relaxed. Internally, this was not the case, as he wondered who this woman was, and why she reacted so when she saw the seal, which, according to Jiraiya, he came up with during the Third Great Shinobi War. It took several minutes before Hijiki got tired of the silence and growled at Jisei. "Speak up." Jisei lowered his cup and raised an eyebrow at her. It took another long moment before he answered, as he knew it would make her angry. Was the only thing that was heard before he took another sip of tea. Resisting the urge to hit him, Hijiki gritted her teeth. "Tell me, why do you have this seal? Jiraiya shouldn't have put it on you." Jisei was very curious as to why she was so excited about the simple seal of resistance. Sighing, he set the cup down on the table and crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm wondering why you're so upset about the simple seal that Jiraiya designed during the Third Great War." Hijiki almost growled when she saw the teenager's obvious indifference to something that took Minato and Jiraiya 2 years to create. Yondaime Hokage spent years creating this seal. "You have no right to use it." "Yondaime, huh?" said Jisei to himself, shifting his gaze to the seal on his hand before looking at it again. "That still doesn't explain why you're so upset. You yourself were not more than 8 years old when he died." Hijiki blinked and leaned back in her chair, hearing the unintended addition to her age, slightly dispelling her anger. She took a deep breath, catching Jisei's eyes darting to her chest for the shortest fraction of a second. Reaction told her something about him that she didn't know before. It was an instinctive reaction, and that he wasn't a pervert like most men. The brief pause before his eyes returned to her face told her that he liked what he saw, but he was respectful enough not to hold his gaze. She should have been proud of the fact that a healthy young man still found her attractive, despite the fact that she was almost 40. Allowing a slight smirk to decorate her lips, she crossed her legs so that her pants pulled up her leg. "How old do you think I am?" she said in a silky voice. Jisei was not a pervert, in fact he hated them passionately, but he had to admit to himself that she was a very attractive woman, and when she spoke like that, he felt hot. Coughing softly into his palm, he looked at her for a moment to try to assess her age more closely. "Honestly, I think you're 25. Her smile widened a little as a faint tinge of blush touched her cheeks. "You really know how to flatter a girl, Jisei. I'm actually 38. Seeing the expression of his slack jaw as his eyes wandered over her in disbelief, she couldn't help but laugh. Recovering after a moment, he scratched the back of his head with a laugh. "I guess I was right to think you were an angel when you showed up." Hearing such an addition, Hijiki's cheeks turned red. Looking at him through her eyelashes, she sees the reason for her stay in the room and makes a stoic face. "Enough flattery. Tell me why you have this seal." Jisei sighed and put the cup of tea on the table before looking seriously into her eyes. "What is your security clearance level in the Jiraiya network?" "What?" she said, wondering what her security level had to do with him having a seal. Seeing that she was about to say something, he raised his hand to warn her. "I'm actually his disciple. He's teaching me the art of ninja. About 2 weeks after we started training, he put resistance seals on me." Hijiki could understand why Jiraiya wanted to keep the identity of his chosen heir a secret, but she was still angry and offended because her son's godfather did not trust her with this information. Jisei was more than curious how she would react to the seal and what he had told her. It was quite obvious that she wasn't just another informant, judging by the emotions she was showing. Leaning back, he sipped his tea calmly, giving her time to pull herself together and decide to see where it would lead. After a few moments, Hijiki calmed down and finished her tea. "That still doesn't explain why you have this seal. I can understand the secrecy, but not why he put this seal on you. You should ask Jiraiya yourself then," he said, filling both their cups. Outwardly calm, she picked up her cup and slowly sipped her tea, carefully examining the teenager opposite her. At first glance, he looked like he was enjoying tea with a good friend, considering how relaxed he looked, and there was a slight smile on his face. However, as soon as her gaze touched his eyes, they told a different story. Despite the way he looked, she could tell he was studying her every move, reading every muscle twitch and pose. Seeing how well he did it, she had to give him credit. With his attractive but nondescript appearance and friendly aura, he is unlikely to be remembered as a nice young man after spending a few minutes in a friendly, if slightly tense silence while they sipped tea. Hijiki finally spoke. "Naruto mentioned that Konoha was recently invaded. Can you tell me more about it?" An expression of melancholy was reflected on Jisei's face before he put down the cup. "I can tell you most of it, but there are parts that were classified by the Hokage." He ran his hand over his face as if he was going to do something he would rather avoid. It all started with the Chunin exams. A few weeks passed, and Hijiki started helping out at the hotel in a role very similar to what Mariko was doing. Like Jisei, she quickly made friends with the villagers. While young women envied her, older women sympathized with her after hearing about how she had to leave her son with a friend after bandits killed her husband. So when they saw how happy Hijiki was playing with the children, they started asking her to help Jisei look after the children under the pretext that he should also look after the hotel. During this time, both Hijiki and Jisei talked more and gained each other's trust to some extent, but as nothing more than Jiraiya's associates. It didn't help that Hijiki felt surges of chakra in the forest, coinciding with the characteristics of Jisei's chakra, despite the fact that they remained friendly, but aloof due to a lack of trust and the need to hide their identities. This quasi-confrontation between them continued until Hijiki stayed in the village for almost 6 weeks, when one of Jisei's secrets was revealed as a result of an accident at the hotel. It was shortly after sunrise when Hijiki and Jisei were in the basement sorting alcohol. The reason they were doing this was because Naruto was at a village council meeting and Mariko was at a seamstress trying on her party dress. Hijiki and Jisei decided to divide the tasks. He sorted everything, and she made sure that everything was properly stored and inventoried. Everything was going well until Jisei had to stand on a barrel to get to the shelf. Unfortunately, due to excessive departure, the barrel in combination with a slightly uneven ground began to tilt. Trying to prevent the fall, he grabbed the edge of the shelf, breaking it. Therefore, even though he managed to jump off in time, he tried his best to catch the objects as they fell. After a few moments of what seemed like a scene from a comedy, Jisei managed to save all the items and exhaled heavily, hunching over so that his back hit the stack behind him. Hearing a giggle, he looked up and saw Hijiki cover her mouth, trying to hide her laughter, and sheepishly grinned back at her until her eyes widened when she saw that a barrel began to fall over him. "Oh no!" That's all she heard before Jisei disappeared in a puff of smoke when the barrel crashed into his head. Although luck was on Naruto's side, as nothing was broken, Hijiki stood looking at this scene for a few minutes before letting her chakra flare up a little. She felt Jisei's chakra outside the village. Deciding to get some more answers from him, she began to put things in order until he came. 10 minutes later, Jisei entered the basement and saw Hijiki sitting on a barrel, and despite his nervousness, he could not help but admire her. She was wearing buckskin capri-style pants with her legs crossed, showing the flawless slightly tanned skin of her calves, and moccasin-style slippers. Her torso was covered with a soft green hunter-style tunic with short sleeves, which had a 3-inch slit with loose lacing going down from her collar, and her arms were crossed under her breasts. Her hair was braided in such a way that one large braid fell over each shoulder, and the other wrapped around her head like a tiara. The image, combined with the power depicted by her eyes, make her look like a forest goddess ready to scold a wayward hunter. In general, he couldn't help but find her incredibly sexy. The way the corners of her mouth twitched in a ghostly grin as he unconsciously licked his lips didn't hurt either. They stared at each other in silence until Hijiki broke the silence. First, the seal, which took Jiraiya and Yondaime 2 years to create, then, presumably, you became his successor, and now a clone jutsu of rank B. It really makes me wonder who you really are. She said softly in a stone-cold tone that combined with the fire in her eyes in a frightening but strangely alluring way. Several minutes passed while he was sweating, trying to figure out what to do in this situation. I think nothing can be done, because her beautiful hair is like a red thread of fate. He said it to himself loudly enough for Hijiki to hear a whisper that made her gasp slightly. Sighing, he folded his hands over what was easily recognizable as the clone seal, resulting in 2 clones appearing before one turned into Hijiki, causing the real one to raise an eyebrow out of curiosity. "They'll take care of everything here while we talk. Follow me and try not to be noticed," he said. Hijiki stared after him for a few long moments before looking at the clones taking inventory and couldn't help but wonder if her pants really exposed her ass so well when she saw her clone bend over to count the jars of fruit jam on the table. Dismissing this thought, she got up and followed Jisei. Jisei remained silent for the 30 minutes it took them to finish what, to Hijiki's annoyance, seemed like a leisurely stroll. When they reached their destination, she surveyed the area, noting that they were in a clearing of decent size, which showed signs of being used as a training ground. Turning to Jisei, it was obvious that he was trying to figure out what he could and could not tell her, so she chose to remain silent for now. "Before we start, you have to understand that there are a lot of things I can't tell you about, and I may have big problems because of a simple hint, so you'll have to put up with me." Seeing her expression, he ran his hand through his hair. "Believe me, I know how you feel about being kept in the dark about things, but the damage that can be done by revealing these secrets is not worth the risk. However, I make you a promise. I'll talk to Jiraiya as soon as he gets back, and then I'll tell you everything I can. It's not that I don't trust you, since I can say you're a good person, but I have to protect my nakama." Seeing the honesty in his eyes and hearing the sincerity of his words, she relaxed. Okay, but how do I know you won't lie to me? Jisei scratched his head while thinking about it before he realized. How about we tell each other more about ourselves? He said with a smile before frowning. However, it won't work as we have to hide our identities. Although she thought it was a good idea and wasn't too worried about him finding out her identity as everyone thought she had been dead for 18 years. I like this idea, but you're right, there are a few problems with it. We can tell more about each other, but change what might hint at personality. For example, names, hair color, mission locations, and the like. This will still allow us to trust each other and keep secrets safe. Jisei thought for a few minutes and admitted that he liked the idea, and in some cases he would not have to lie. Great! Did I tell you how I freed the country from the evil bandit king? He said with a big smile. Over the following weeks, Jisei and Hijiki became close friends and sparring partners. Needless to say, other villagers noticed the change in behavior, especially Mariko, who often shared gossip with other women in the village. Most of the gossip was about what a cute couple they would make. When Jisei and Hijiki looked at the children, they kept glancing at each other, even though they were just trying to figure out which parts of their stories had been changed. By the time Hijiki had lived in the village for 5 months, many villagers were betting on when they would finally make their relationship official, and which of them would be recognized first. The flip side of this was that some of the things Jisei did out of friendship with Hijiki caused many women to ask their husbands/boyfriends why they weren't talking about their relationship yet. It didn't help that they were often seen walking together in the woods in their free time. To make matters worse, one of the mothers persuaded her 6-year-old daughter to ask Hijiki when she planned to give a Jisei-aji baby when the hotel was packed with a dining crowd, to their embarrassment and the delight of the villagers. It's clear that the next couple of weeks were little uncomfortable for the two on the run. The first few days after the lunch incident were so bad that their sparring sessions were more like a game where you can't watch or touch. Despite the fact that 2 weeks later everything returned to normal, the images, insinuations and teasing of the villagers remained in their heads. Although Jisei found it all terribly embarrassing and at times could not even look at Hijiki, he still treated her as a friend. Hijiki, on the other hand, took it mostly calmly, finding it funny how he blushed and twitched when he realized that his eyes lingered on her, especially several times when she caught him banging his head against the basement wall to the mantra, I'm not a pervert. I won't turn into an arrow senin, over and over again. Although she had previously admitted that he was physically attractive and had a kind heart, she did not attach any more importance to this until she heard the village women talking about what a good husband he would be, and the younger girls wished they got such a guy, and how lucky Hijiki was that she had there is such a guy. At first, she completely rejected the gossip, but the more she heard, the more she realized that they were right. Every time she heard gossip, she remembered what Jisei had said about her hair, something that only one person had told her before. Even though there were secrets between them, she had to admit that he got along well with children, respected women, naturally made friends, and that she secretly liked how his muscles glistened with sweat after their sparring. All this leads to the fact that we see Jisei being beaten in taijutsu sparring, because he was too distracted, trying not to look at how her muscles tense under her clothes, how her breasts bounce when she moves. As funny as it made him nervous, she couldn't help but feel that she was impressed, but at the same time disappointed that a young man who was so obviously attracted to her managed to maintain such composure that he didn't take any steps other than the occasional friendly flirtation. Neither of them knew that apart from their friendship and the villagers' less sophisticated matchmaking attempts, there were several other things that influenced her attractiveness/disappointment. Firstly, it is the fact that she was at an age when a woman's libido increases dramatically, like a teenage boy. Secondly, her chakra was attracted to his due to the fact that tiny amounts of kubi were constantly flowing through his chakra channels. Finally, although she has been a widow for 18 years, she has not been with anyone during that time. Taking all this into account, it's not surprising that she reached the limit and decided to make a move. Taking advantage of the way he jerked his arm when he realized that his blow was supposed to hit her in the chest, she grabbed his hand, which was quickly followed by a knee strike in the solar plexus, which not only knocked him out of the rut, but also knocked him on his back. By the time he regained consciousness, he was already lying on his back, his hands were clamped over his head, and Hijiki was sitting on his waist, swallowing hard. His eyes darted nervously around, trying not to take advantage of the view presented by her shirt with the collar unbuttoned. I think you've won, Hichan. Say. She said in such a tone that his eyes immediately turned to her, and what he saw in them so lured him into a trap that he did not even think to look away. Do you like me? She said in a low but serious voice. Yes, he answered just as seriously, even if he looked like a sailor caught up in the siren song. Am I attractive? Yes. Do you trust me? Yes. Without taking her eyes off him, she bent down so that their noses touched each other and spoke almost in a whisper. Can I trust you? Yes, she stared into his eyes for a moment before joining their lips in a kiss that left no doubt about what she wanted, and slid her palms over his hands. The shock to his body at that moment was so strong that his higher brain functions collapsed, and his body automatically reacted to the kiss. When he was finally able to make sense of the last few minutes, his right arm wrapped around her waist and his left arm was below her shoulder blades before pulling her tightly to him. After a few moments, the kiss turned from fiercely hot to passionate, and Jisei did not notice how the sharpened stone pierced his spleen. 2 months have passed since Hijiki and Jisei has officially become a couple, to the delight of the villagers. The next morning, the happy couple woke up in each other's arms, unaware of their late guest. After some time spent in kisses and hugs, he got up from Hijiki, who was about to cook breakfast while Jisei was washing dishes. Almost an hour later, Jiraiya finally woke up and went to check on Naruto and his guest. When he reached the door, he had to cover his mouth with his hand to stifle a perverted giggle. We have to pick up the order from the butcher soon. Why rush to beef when there's something much tastier right here? Hearing a soft groan, Jiraiya took out his notebook, preparing to take notes before opening the door a crack and seeing a red-haired woman sitting on Naruto's lap. The pen collided with the paper, while the redhead hugged Naruto, pressing her nose to his neck. Her face was hidden from view, and his hands explored what was inside her yukata. Jiraiya's grin widened as the woman sighed as his disciple apparently reached a sensitive spot before she stood up, exposing her face in the morning light. The couple's heads jerked toward the door at the sound of the notebook falling to the floor. Both of their eyes narrowed before she slid off his lap, adjusting her outfit, and he headed for the door to deliver a punch that Tsunade would be proud of. When he pushed open the door, he had to stop in surprise before his anger flared up again. Ero Sennin, you have 10 seconds to give me a good reason not to break every bone in your body. He said through his teeth. Jiraiya's expression changed very quickly before it became completely serious. Standing up to his full height, he looked Naruto straight in the eyes. We need to talk. Naruto looked back into the room, but was interrupted before he could answer. Looking at Sennin, he easily realized how serious he was, and nodded, stepped back. There was a deathly silence in the room for a few moments before Jiraiya spoke. Have you already told each other who you are? The pair exchanged curious glances before Hijiki replied. Not yet. We both agreed to talk to you first, despite our feelings for each other. The unusually serious pervert was silent for a few more moments before meeting Hijiki's gaze. How close have you become, Kushina? The seriousness of his tone and the fact that he was using her real name stopped any answer she was going to give. She stared at Naruto for a minute, as if communicating with him with her eyes, before crossing her arms. I don't understand why it's so important how close Jisei and I have become, but if you want to know. We are a couple in every sense of the word. Several long moments passed while Jiraiya's eyes studied the confused couple, not understanding what he was thinking. Finally, his expression relaxed as he let out a long sigh and sat down on the bed, rubbing his temples, muttering to himself. Now I understand why Tsuhime drinks so much. Naruto and the now called Kushina looked at each other, trying to figure out what was going on, but not knowing what to say. Another sigh brought their attention back to Jiraiya just in time to see him place his hands on his lap. What you are about to learn will be hard to hear for both of you and will probably land me in the hospital, but keep in mind that neither of you knows these truths, and that secrets are kept and lies are told for some reason. After making sure that they both understood everything, despite their confusion, he met the eyes of the only woman in the room. Naruto, cancel your technique. Kushina's eyes widened when the full meaning of these simple words reached her. She turned with a trembling look at Naruto, praying that she was wrong. Naruto, for his part, was completely lost and looked first at his beloved, then at Sensei, worrying, turning his blood to ice before dispelling the technique for the first time in more than 7 months. When the smoke began to dissipate. When he looked at Kushina, a very unpleasant feeling appeared in his stomach when he saw that she was trembling like a leaf, and tears were pouring out of her eyes. When all the smoke cleared, she fell to her knees, hugging her stomach. No. You are welcome, no. Before Naruto could take more than 2 steps towards her, he found his path blocked by Jiraiya's hand. Even though he wanted to object, he stepped back and allowed Jiraiya to approach her. He could only watch in silence, never feeling so powerless before. Jiraiya put his hand on Kushina's shoulder. Kushina, he said softly, forcing her to raise her tear-stained face. I can't even imagine what you're going through right now, but you need to know to believe it's not your fault. If anyone is to blame, it's me. Hate me. Hate me. If that's what you need, then it's a burden that I have to bear, but never blame him. He said, taking her chin in his hand, gently turning her head to look at Naruto. There's only one thing you should be thinking about right now. One thought that is more important than any other. Do you love his? It seemed like an eternity passed while the blonde's anxiety and eyes full of worry stared at the extremely shocked redhead before her trembling began to decrease. Turning to Kushina, his smile became somewhat more sardonic before he leaned over and whispered in her ear, leaving her no choice but to look at Naruto. Look at him. See how even in his ignorance he still cares. He still loves you. Innocent and unsuspecting, thinking that you died on his birthday, he followed your desire to find happiness and get together with a woman like his mother. With only a few distorted stories, he still hit the bullseye. It may not be the way you planned or wanted, but will you push him away now? 18 years old. After 18 years, will you let him wallow in anguish again? Do you see it in his eyes? How does it hurt him to stand there? How much does he crave to hug you? Are you going to deny him and yourself after you've given each other this and more? She stood there with Jiraiya's hands on her shoulders, as if he was the only thing keeping her from fainting before he whispered something last. Do you love him? Still trembling, she leaned back with both hands on her stomach and stared into Naruto's eyes for a long time before her trembling finally subsided as she remembered the day he was born and all the time they had spent together over the past 7 months. Turning to Jiraiya, she nodded fearfully but resolutely. Seeing that she had pulled herself together, he returned her nod with a slight smile. Getting to his feet, he headed for the door, but stopped when Naruto put his hand on his shoulder, not taking his eyes off Kushina. After patting his hand a couple of times, Jiraiya said softly, later. She needs you, before carefully closing the door when he left. Never before had Jiraiya felt as old or beaten up as he did now. Leaning against the wall, he prayed to all the other deities he could think of to get through this. Slowly and more tired than ever, he headed to Naruto's office, already composing one of the most important letters of his life. As the sun began to set, Naruto finally entered the kitchen, where the staff was strangely quiet, glancing worriedly at Jiraiya and Jisei, while they went about their business. The blank look in his eyes as he approached the elder only made the mood even more gloomy. A few minutes passed while Naruto was just standing there and Jiraiya was looking out the window with a bottle of sake that he hadn't touched for 3 hours before the sage broke the silence. "How is she?" "What is it?" he asked, still looking out the window. "Better. She fell asleep about an hour ago." A few more minutes passed before Jiraiya turned his head. "I sent a message to Shizuna. I just told her about what happened and that we need all your and Kushina's medical records." Silence reigned in the room for another long moment before Naruto spoke in the same hollow voice as his expression. "Why? Don't be afraid, when you find out, you'll understand." The minutes slowly dragged by as they looked at each other, until Naruto looked where Kushina should have been and stared at the ceiling for several long minutes before speaking. "I understand. I hate it, but I get it. We'll talk again when we're ready." Then he turned around without looking at Jiraiya, who was collecting a tray of food. He stopped in the doorway with his back to the room and spoke again. "Send Hamakichi when Shizun arrives." With that, he left the room. Jiraiya just turned to the window, still holding an untouched bottle of sake in his hand. 2 weeks had passed since the bomb was dropped, and the situation was still very tense. Naruto and Kushina became very withdrawn, and they were only seen eating or going to the toilet. All the villagers who made friends with Naruto and Kushina were very concerned about the situation, and the appearance of such a famous medic as Shizun did not help their anxiety. The glances Shizun cast at Jiraiya whenever they were in the same room only added to the confusion of the villagers. Therefore, when Shizun approached Jiraiya in the living room and said, "It's time," when they were all settled in the room that Shizun used as an office/laboratory, Shizun poured everyone a portion of sake before taking a big sip straight from the bottle. "Instead of going into details using medical terms that only I understand, I will go straight to the heart of the matter. This is a very unique set of circumstances. Although I do not know if the type of seal and biju are factors, but I know that Naruto, being a second-generation Jinchuriki, showed some completely unexpected results." She paused for a second and spoke again. "As for DNA, you are like distant relatives to each other." "How is this possible?" asked Kushina. There was obvious confusion in her voice. "That's where things get complicated. It seems that Jinchuriki increases the rate of DNA mutation. Although the myth that Uzumaki are the only ones who can accept Kubi is wrong. Destabilization of the genetic code usually causes cancer or phagocyte disorder in someone for 20 years, it seems that Uzumaki's vitality slows down the progression by an order of magnitude. Fortunately, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Kushina, your cellular structure seems to have stabilized. The strange thing is what happened to your uterus and ovaries." Hearing this, Naruto looked anxiously at Kushina, while she instinctively put her hands on her stomach. Shizun raised her hands in a placating manner before continuing. "Don't worry, you're fine. The test results show that any children you have, they will become genetically stronger than any previous generation of Uzumaki in almost every way." Naruto showed that the DNA change is not a harmful mutation, but almost like a forced evolution in the order of origin of the pedigree. Kushina's reaction was a little different considering she growled before grabbing the blonde's arm. Even considering the way things were going, Jiraiya couldn't help but smile when he remembered how she did something very similar when she first started dating Minato. When Naruto filtered it through his brain, he couldn't help but squeeze Kushina's hand harder and put the other one on the Kyuubi seal. After a moment, he hesitantly began to speak. "Little sister. You really don't care, do you? Is it that I have a fox in me, or that I love my own mother?" Shizun smiled softly, looking him straight in the eye. "What kind of sister would I be if I didn't support my brother in what makes him happy?" Her smile widened as her eyes shifted to Kushina. "Besides, I can't wait to see the look on Iruki-kun's face when your red-haired, blue-eyed, ramen-loving prankster kids go to the academy." Naruto blushed slightly, and he scratched his head at the image of Shizun's words embedded in his mind, but stopped when his eyes met Kushina's. The redhead has been very conflicted over the past 2 weeks. The long conversations she and Naruto have had since their identities were revealed, bringing them closer in one respect, have also worsened the situation. She did not lose sight of the fact that Naruto, despite his own emotional roller coaster, was her mainstay. However, she also noticed that he wanted her more than his mother and kept himself from doing things like caressing her face, stroking her hair and forcing himself not to kiss her on the lips. So when Shizun said those words, she couldn't. Kushina's dream. Kushina sat on the sofa in the Hokage's office and held the blonde in her arms for no more than 5 months with a smile on her face, watching what was happening in front of her. Naruto was sitting at the Hokage table, and a 6-year-old blonde girl with purple eyes was sitting on his lap, with a Hokage hat on her head. Unlike most days, the papers on the table were not official documents, but drawings that the father and daughter duo painted together for almost an hour. "Sorry, Hokage-sama, but you have guests," Shizun said from the doorway with a smile in her voice. Naruto kissed the girl on the cheek before looking up. "Let them come in." Stepping aside, Shizun opened the door and waved to them. A very angry Iruka, carrying a red-haired boy of about 10 years old on his shoulder, entered before putting him on a chair in front of the Hokage. Seeing who it was, Naruto leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the armrests. The boy only grinned shyly in response, forcing Kushina to shake her head with a smile. The silence was broken by the girl on Naruto's lap when she put the crayons down with a sigh. "I'm disappointed in you, Nii-chan. This is the 3rd time in a week that Iruka-san has brought you here, and it's not even lunchtime yet," she said with such seriousness that it could only be described as charming. The boy lowered his head dejectedly before muttering an apology. "I'm sorry." The girl shook her head with a sigh. "Seriously, Nii-chan, if you're going to joke, do it right." While Iruka only sighed humbly at how true this statement was, the ladies giggled. Naruto's reaction was to laugh and imitate his infamous kitsune grin. "She's right. A real joker always has a backup plan for such things." He looked at his daughter with a wide smile. "Since you have the Hokage hat, why don't you determine his punishment?" The girl looked at her older brother, who prettily pouted his lips in thought before a grin appeared, very similar to her father's grin, because of which Iruka rubbed his head, already feeling an approaching headache. Reaching into the drawer, she pulled out a scroll and threw it on the table. "Your punishment is to study this scroll. You will be tested on Saturday, and if you fail the test, we will have no choice but to ban you from eating ramen for a week." The combination of the seriousness of her tone, the Tsunade-style expression and the horrifyingly indignant look on the boy's face was a mixture that made adults grab their sides with laughter. After a few minutes, Naruto managed to calm down enough to regain control, except for a few chuckles when he looked at the scroll. "As your father and Hokage, I think this is an appropriate punishment. What do you think, Iruka?" Not knowing the contents of the scroll, Iruka rubbed his chin, thinking about it. When a few minutes had passed, Shizun leaned over the back of the chair and put her arm around his shoulders. "I'll make your favorite dessert tonight if you agree," she said, letting her breath tickle his ear. Iruka blushed slightly before coughing into his hand. Sounds like a fair punishment since it was a minor incident. So be it. I'm looking forward to your results, son. While the boy was shyly nodding his head, Iruka lightly kissed Shizune before standing up and bowing slightly to Naruto. Throwing the boy on his shoulder with his usual ease, he went to get the scroll. Kushina was brought out of her reverie by the sound of a chair squeaking on the floor, and blushed from the way Naruto looked at her. Her embarrassment only deepened when Jiraiya and Shizune grinned at them. No matter how easy and fun it is to tease you two right now, I will refrain. Jiraiya said before stretching and heading for the door. Send Shizune, they have something to think about. Later that night, Naruto was lying in bed staring at the ceiling in the room he occupied after the amazing news. As much as he wanted to be near Kushina, and as much as he hated that fact, he knew that his presence at times only made the situation worse. He could have snuck into her room just to keep an eye on her if it wasn't for Shizune. He already knew what kind of relationship he wanted with Kushina, but he loved her too much to push her to this. What else could he do but give her time and be there for her when she needed him? With a long sigh, he turned his head to look at where Kushina should have been lying 2 weeks ago. Hearing the door open, he sat up, wondering who would enter his room at this time of night. He watched carefully as the figure entered the room, closing the door behind him, and walked out into the moonlight. His eyes widened upon seeing who it was and literally jumped off the bed before freezing in place as hope and fear unleashed the Fourth Great War in his stomach. The two were silent for several long minutes, looking at each other as a cloud crossed the moon. When it passed, revealing their faces to the light again, their eyes were still glued to each other. Naruto. Do you remember what you said that day when yours was scattered in the basement? Kushina asked in a whisper, folding her hands in front of her stomach. Naruto's face turned thoughtful as he recalled the events of that day, and considering everything they were talking about, he wondered which part she was talking about. Yes, I remember, he said, without taking his eyes off her. You were thinking about my hair, weren't you? What is it? She asked with an almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. His lips curved slightly into a soft smile as he remembered what she was talking about. So you heard it after all. Naruto took an uncertain step forward before answering her. Ever since you appeared, I thought you were some kind of angel, and I realized that I was wrong. Only a goddess can be so beautiful. Naruto's expression became full of love before he turned to the bed, gently placing his hand on the pillow. There were nights when I didn't sleep, just watching you sleep. The way your hair fell around you, shining in the moonlight like a physical embodiment of love, made me feel like Kami-sama herself was blessing me. The sight was so beautiful. I didn't care that the rest of my life would be pure hell, because I knew that as long as we were together, my life would be perfect. Naruto's hand moved as if caressing her face as he recalled those nights before slowly bringing his hand to his side. Tears flowed down Kushina's face when she heard not only his words, but also the love in them. She was silent, her voice lost from the force of the emotions she was experiencing when Naruto turned to face her again. The first 13 years of my life may have been hell, but I would gladly go through it all again to spend another day with you. To hug you again. To feel your lips on mine again. To be near you. So that the last thought before going to bed was about how wonderful your hair smells. It's very painful to realize that when I'm lying in this bed, you're not there. Naruto's smile turned sad when he saw how tears spoil the untouched skin of her face. The one thing I've always wanted more than anything in the world is family, and that's something that will never change between us. That's why I'm giving you a promise for life, Dadabayo. Whatever you decide, we'll be a family no matter what. No matter how much pain it causes me, we are a family. Husband and wife, mother and son, it won't change the most important thing. I love you, and even if it means giving up on becoming a Hokage, I will never leave you. As she listened to Naruto speak, tears flowed more and more from the intensity of his sincere words. There was never any doubt that she loved him. The main question was how this love would be expressed. She thought about it long and hard, but she could not come to a decision even after the morning meeting. That's why she decided to make a choice based on what she was going to ask him tonight. There was no way she could have expected it to turn out like this. He was ready to give up everything for her. Friends, Konoha, his dream, everything, just for her, even if it meant that they would never have what they shared 2 months before Jiraiya's arrival. What could have been 2 minutes or several eternities passed while she looked into his eyes, never once seeing love and rejection of determination. With tears in her eyes, she smiled, pressing her hands to her heart. Naruto. Know that you have come so far, given so much, everything for me. Know that even despite the pain you suffered because of me and your father, you still love me so much. Naruto's expression softened, he did not take his eyes off her and spoke in a low whisper that slid across the room. I will always love you. This simple word resonated in her body so deeply that she could even feel it with her soul. A shiver ran through her body in a warm, soothing wave, as if she was literally trapped in his love. The warmth seemed to spread through her, starting from the depths, until her tears stopped flowing and her choice was made. In the face of such boundless devotion, unquestionable love and unwavering will, how could she even look at him with anything less? Kushina stepped forward until she was completely in the moonlight with a truly happy smile on her face. Naruto watched in fascination as the pale light added an unearthly glow to her. Without taking her eyes off each other, as if communicating such profound truths that there were no words to describe them, she slowly but without hesitation untied the obi holding her yukata closed. With a grace born of absolute confidence in her actions, she let obi slip out of her fingers, forming an almost serpentine pile on the floor. Her heart felt lighter when she saw that a new emotion appeared in Naruto's eyes. Slowly, she ran her hands down the sides from her hips to her chest before taking hold of the collar of her yukata. Beautiful. Naruto whispered in awe of the scene in front of him, which only Kami-sama could arrange. Slowly and gracefully, Kushina got out of the fallen clothes like a nymph and approached Naruto to gently put her hand on his cheek. Bending his head from the touch, he puts his hand on her hand, continuing to look into her eyes. Naruto, she said in a hoarse whisper before bending down and kissing him, and there will be no second part. The plot is finished.